This is the Audi RS e-Tron GT, a car I know very well. We've already brought you a full review from our first drive up in Scotland. We've compared it head to head against its brother from another mother, the Porsche Taycan. But this is our new long-termer. We got this car in because we wanted to find out what it's like to live with on a day-to-day basis. So with that in mind, this is our real-world review of the Audi RS e-Tron GT. Okay, first things first, it's Monday morning and I am in desperate need of a little pick-me-up, a little caffeine injection. So I'm gonna head to a local artisan coffee spot that I know around here. But I thought I'd start the review on some nice, normal roads, driving around in town. Do you know what? The first thing I've noticed is that it makes even mundane journeys feel quite special. You could be commuting in this car and it would feel like almost a privilege, which I suppose it should, because it's quite an expensive car. £86,000 for the standard e-Tron GT and over £117,000 for the RS version. When I compared this car to the Taycan, I noticed that the Taycan had noticeably better suspension, and driving this in isolation, you don't really notice that it's not quite as good as the Porsches. It's set up to be slightly softer, the air suspension kind of is designed to float along the road, and even though the vertical movement isn't quite as well controlled as in a Taycan, it's actually quite a nice ride. It feels great just driving around. Here's something I don't talk about regularly in my reviews: crash testing. It's not a mandatory thing for manufacturers to test their cars according to Euro NCAP testing, and Audi actually hasn't independently tested this car with Euro NCAP. However, Porsche has. The Taycan scored 5 out of 5 stars in Euro NCAP testing, so you can pretty much guarantee that because underneath they're essentially the same car, that the Audi is going to be safe as houses as well. Reassuring. Something else I don't talk about regularly, but I will today: insurance. It's going to be expensive in this car. It's in Group 50, which is the highest possible group. I actually looked up last night how much it would cost to insure me to drive this car, and the lowest price I could find was £2,100, but most prices were coming out at around the £3,000 mark. Sure, you're possibly going to save money on charging the thing, but insurance, yeah, that's where they sting you. The final thing I want to talk about is maneuverability. So this car comes with rear wheel steering, and that has several benefits, and I think the major one is that when you're driving on narrow roads, you can do U-turns and 3-point turns really easily. Even though it's not a small car, it feels a lot more maneuverable than you might think given its size. Right, let's go get that coffee. I need it after that insurance price. Okay, so here we are at the local coffee place. Coming into a McDonald's is always kind of tricky, especially in a low-slung car, because they have these quite abrupt curbs that can do a lot of damage to your wheels if you're not careful. But one of the things I really like about this RS e-Tron GT is the 3D parking system, which lets you get a 3D view of everything around you. One thing bugs me about this though is that the car's black, right? But the car on the screen is grey, and also the wheels are a completely different design to the ones that I've got on this actual car. Anyway, let's get this coffee. Can I get a double cheeseburger and a cappuccino, please? This is quite nice as well. In an electric car, you haven't got the exhaust running, so when you wind down the window, you don't get a whiff of your own exhaust as you drive along. That's quite cool. Lovely. Cheers, buddy. Now, interior space is not amazing. I've got 2 cup holders in here, which is great, as you'd expect. But apart from that, there's not an awful lot. You've got this weird little compartment at the front, which is probably, I would suspect, let me just confirm that, big enough for a double cheeseburger. But apart from that, the glove box, definitely not enormous. Still, it's a lovely place to sit. After my lunch, I was fully fueled up, which felt like a good opportunity to talk about what the RS e-Tron is like in terms of fuel economy, even if that fuel is electricity. This car has a 93.4 kilowatt hour battery pack, of which 85 kilowatt hours is usable. Driving around town earlier, I was averaging about 1.9 miles per kilowatt hour, which if you do the maths, equates to around 160 miles of range. That's day-to-day driving though. How is the efficiency when you're driving at higher speeds, for example, on a motorway?
The result is not so impressive. 2.5 miles per kilowatt hour is about what you can expect realistically, although in perfect conditions without using the aircon you might be able to push that to 3. In other words, you can expect between 230 and 279 miles. Is that enough for a Grand Tourer? Well, maybe actually, because cruising at 60 miles an hour at that kind of range is about 4 to 4.5 hours of traveling, which is where you might want to stop for a rest and a refuel anyway.
Here's something I really like. It gives you this range bubble on the navigation, which shows you exactly how far you can drive to give you a visual representation of your range. And if you're driving beyond that, the satellite navigation system will actually work out the best charges to stop at and how much energy you'll have left at the end of your journey. Quite clever. It's not all perfect in here though. For example, you don't get an awful lot of toys. I haven't got massaging seats in a GT. You'd expect that. There's also not a ton of stuff going on in the infotainment system. There's the usual stuff like your calendar, your weather, your messages, etc. But apart from that, there really isn't an awful lot of gadgetry going on in this car. What is good though is the Bang & Olufsen sound system. That sounds really good. So if you like jamming out to tunes on a long journey, that is going to serve you pretty well. Time for another important test. How does the car feel when you want to have a little bit of fun when you drive? The RS e-Tron GT has 4 different driving modes: efficiency and comfort, which are the kind of defaults when you want to extend the range and just cruise around. And then there's dynamic and individual, which are the 2 modes you're likely to engage when you want to have a little bit of fun. In dynamic, the first thing you notice is that the responsiveness of the throttle is very much increased. So I'll whack it into dynamic right now. The steering doesn't really change. It feels the exact same weight as it does in comfort and efficiency, but what does change is the ride height on the car. The air suspension drops by a couple of millimeters and you can actually feel the car tighten up. The body control is much better, not just in a corner where it does stay flat, but also on the straights. You might think that dynamic mode is quite harsh, but actually you could drive in this mode pretty much every day. I'll give you the performance figures because they are quite hilarious. 637 horsepower and 830 newton meters of torque. Audi reckon it'll do 0 to 62 in 3.3 seconds and 155 miles an hour flat out. I know it's not part of everyday driving, but let me just indulge me for a second. I'm going to pull in and do a launch control and just see what happens. It's got an onboard timer, dynamic mode selected, launch control active, foot on the brake, foot on the accelerator, head back, otherwise you'll hurt yourself, and just, oh my goodness. Yeah. So 2 things, the car has a 2-speed transmission, and after a certain point, you feel it change gear, believe it or not, gear changing in an electric car. The second point I want to make is that this thing will happily do 3.1, 3.2, 0 to 62s all day long, and it's pretty painful actually. The predominant feeling I have right now is nausea, to be honest. The brakes are quite interesting too. I've opted for the carbon ceramic brakes on this car. They cost £5,100 extra, but if you're doing big launches and exploiting the speed of this car, they will save your bacon because it's 2.2 tons this car, which means that after a while the brakes will start to fade. But with the carbon ceramics, not even a hint of fade. Really good. What's it like when you're cornering? Well, I've been lucky enough to take this car on a track once or twice, and it does throw shapes. Turn the traction off and it will get the back end out very eagerly. Not going to do that today obviously, but in the bends the car feels really nicely balanced, especially in that dynamic mode. What you notice is that the rear wheel steering system just helps the nose to tuck in more eagerly towards the entry point of a corner. You don't really get any understeer whatsoever. It's a lovely car to drive. The balance is very nice. Does the lack of noise affect the driving experience negatively? Maybe if you're old school, but the RS e-Tron GT does come with a sound generator, so there's always this futuristic sound coming from the car whenever you accelerate or decelerate, which does go some way to improving the experience from an acoustic point of view. It's just a really nice car to drive, that's the bottom line. If I was being really harsh, I could say that the Porsche Taycan Turbo S accelerates more violently, but you don't need more acceleration than you get in this. The steering in the Porsche is also more precise, more granular, but again, this isn't too far off. All round, it's a lovely, fun, engaging car to drive. Really like it. A very important topic to talk about with any electric car is the charging experience, and I think Audi pretty much get it right. We found ourselves at a DC rapid charger outside a supermarket. I think the first thing to do is actually to see whether it works or not, because that's part of the experience of having an EV, isn't it? Seeing whether the bloody things work. So this should be easy. Present my card. The machine should recognize it. This is what I want, CCS. I get this. And the cool thing about the RS e-Tron GT is that it's got two charge ports, one on the left and one on the right. And the left one is for your DC rapid charger. Plug that in, hop over the cable, and is it charging? Let's see. Currently it's absorbing 0 kilowatt hours, but hopefully that will change. Here we go, some numbers are happening over here. 0.01 kilowatt hours delivered. Yeah, it seems like it's charging, doesn't it? Now, I'm currently at a 120 kilowatt charger. This is quite fast, but the car itself can accept charge at up to 270 kilowatts, which means you could go from 25 miles to 200 miles of range in around 17 minutes. Most people are going to charge up at home though from a 7.4 kilowatt wall box, and that will take you around about 9.5 hours. Now, since I am at a supermarket, let's check out the storage in the car. So I'll take you to the boot. I believe this is a 405 litre boot, which is pretty acceptable. Some of that space is taken up by quite a large charging cable, but on the whole, that is a decent amount of room. And if you go around the front, there's even more storage. To access it, you have to open the door and push the button down there. That unlocks it. And then you take yourself to the front, fiddle around a bit down here, and it opens up to give you an extra 85 litres of storage. Incidentally, I mentioned earlier that the sister car of this is the Porsche Taycan, and look there, Porsche logo. They're gonna arrest me for pointing that out. Yeah, Porsche logo. You get a free Porsche toolkit with your Audi. So yeah, not bad. One thing I forgot to mention was the cost of recharging at this particular recharging point by Shell, 79 pence per kilowatt hour. This car has an 85 kilowatt hour battery, so you're looking at about £70 to fill it up. Too much.
Of course, that isn't Audi's fault. The solution is just to stay away from extortionate rapid chargers and top up at home, where a full recharge will cost you around £7 depending on your tariff. Ultimately then, the RS e-Tron GT is a very likeable car, lovely to look at, great to drive in everyday life, efficient enough to take you on a 4-hour run on the motorway, and fast enough to make you feel very ill and/or very scared. We'll be seeing more of this car on the channel over the coming weeks and months, but let us know what you think of it. Give us your questions down below, and we'll see you and the e-Tron very soon.
One more thing, guys, if you're thinking about going electric, there's a great event coming up at Blenheim Palace. It's called EV Live between the 7th and 9th of July. You can talk to experts, drive the latest electric cars, engage in Q&As with people like me. There's food and music and games. Bring the children. I'll see you there.